So this week we are engaging the question or the topic of fear.
Yep.
And kind of unfriending fear in our life. And so we're just gonna ask a lot of people. You're gonna see some things, some questions being asked on the Royal Gorge Bridge, where we're asking people that are truly facing some of their fears. It's one of the highest places in Colorado, where they're standing on a bridge with planks and holes through it, and it just drops to their death. So we are asking the question of what is one of your greatest fears. And so we're going to be talking about that. You're going to see us getting vulnerable and getting real. And one thing with fear, a lot of people don't like talking about it, or they're going to tell you something goofy. And man, I hope that this helps you realize that you're not the only one that is afraid. So, absence of perfect, unfriending fear. Go live in 3, 2, 1.
What's your biggest fear?
Biggest fear?
Yeah.
Probably would be heights currently.
I couldn't even ask him the question is, if your friends jumped off a cliff, would you?
Because I definitely did.
Because
with my friends.
he did jump off a cliff.
Yeah.
Drowning.
Okay. Yeah. What is your greatest fear?
Bridges.
High.
The heights.
The heights.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
We can either just mention something that everybody's afraid of, or we can get real. You know, when you ask people to get real, then it means that they got to get vulnerable and expose things that are actually giving people opportunity to destroy you with. And if somebody knew what you fear the most, man, that could really come back and hurt. But I guess that's why we do this. And so, what am I most afraid of? Golly, I think something that I've been afraid of my whole life is to fail and to let people down. And I guess you tie into the fear of being rejected, and you're constantly just trying to please people and give them what they want. And in the midst of that, you kind of lose yourself. And so I think that's probably my biggest fear is just fear of man, fear of failure, fear of rejection.
What is your biggest fear?
Marriage.
How did you conquer it?
I haven't.
My biggest fear is, and it always has been, not being cool enough. In school, I was always like the popular one, and I was always scared. Like, even though I was in the group, I never like felt like I was in the group. Like, they would always like do things and like not include me, and I wanted to like really prove that I was like cool. And so I started going to like parties, and I started doing things. And I was just making bad decisions to like show that I was like just like them. And honestly, like every single time like I would do something like never felt right, and like I wasn't like okay at that point. I didn't like myself, and like doing this, like I always felt bad about myself, and like we would like be sitting there, and like just like the fear of not being cool enough just like was like eating away at me.
What's your biggest fear?
I think it is bears and holding humongous snakes.
How do you think you'll conquer it?
By just going past it.
Heights.
Heights? And did you conquer
just
it?
did.
Probably one of my biggest fears was how do I fit in? How do I fit into this mold of being, a pastor's wife or being an evangelist's wife? I was afraid of being alone. Really up until recently, where I realized that, fear is a reaction and courage is a decision. And I have to make that choice every single day, to give my fears to the Lord. Because we'll always have different fears. We're always going to fear something. Fear of the future, fear of the past, fear of letting go, fear of, every single day we walk through things that can bring a spirit of fear. I think of Psalms 18:6, where it talks about the Lord is on my side, I will not fear. And then Psalms 118:6, the Lord is with me, I will not be afraid. And I have to almost constantly drive those into my mind, to tell me that, God is with me, God is for me. With Him, I can conquer anything. And, and so, for those of you that are watching this, and you're gripped with fear, I just pray that, that you would just realize that the Lord is for you, and that, with him on your side, you can do anything. No matter what you face, you don't have to walk through it alone. That you know that God is literally just a prayer away.
Could never see one Marvel movie ever again.
My biggest fear is being rejected and not feeling good enough, and I've struggled with that fear my whole entire life. Whether it was through past experiences or future experiences, it was always in the back of my mind. And that has made it hard for me to forgive people because they've hurt me or because someone else has hurt me, and so I take it out on someone else. And so that's just made it really hard to make future relationships. I've always been an outsider with people that I surround myself with, and I don't know if it's because I make it like that just from the fear of being rejected that I already distance myself from that. I've always made it a point to never make anyone else feel rejected. In high school, if I ever saw someone sit by themselves, I would be the first person to stand up and go sit with them. I've been looked down on for being different, and I always viewed that as something so wrong. And I realized that being different is okay, and being different is what I was made to be. And so I think that it's important to value how different I am from everyone else, whether it is being rejected.
My greatest fear is bugs. Being in my sleep.
Use snakes.
Snakes.
Snake.
What if you saw a snake on the middle of that bridge? Would you run from it or get over your fear?
I get over my fear.
I wouldn't say it stopped me in any way, but it definitely influenced what I was thinking. It affected my emotions. It affected just the healthiness in my thought process. But one of the things that I do, because I'm absolutely terrified, every time I get ready to preach, I tell people this. I preach thousands of times, and I preach to small groups and to stadiums, and it don't matter. Sometimes I get more nervous to speak to small groups than to big groups. But I always feel like, they always say, do you have butterflies? No, I have a flock of stinking geese in my stomach. I feel like I'm about to throw up every time I'm ready to preach. I flip that switch. Now it's not even Jamie that is going up on that stage. I'm so driven at that moment. I'm not thinking about fear. I'm not thinking about what anybody else thinks. But it's taken a long time to get there. I've had to overcome my fears by facing them. What's your greatest fear?
My greatest
Your
fear.
greatest fear.
Wow. What a big question.
That's a huge one.
That is a huge question. Because as a believer, I won't tap into fear,
Right.
but I have things that try to overtake me.
Absolutely, yes.
I don't allow them to, but one thing that I would say that always tries to overtake me is self-doubt. And
Right.
I think that's one that many people wrestle with but won't be honest about. But I do know the word, and so the greater one lives on the inside of me, and so when those things try to overtake me, I tap into that, and then I overcome.
Yes.
But I do have moments.
Absolutely. We all do.
This fear has stopped me to be the woman of God that I know that I'm called to be. It's hard to do what God is calling you to do when you're full of fear, because I think a lot of times you don't. It's a lack of trust. And so, and I know that. And so I've just, like I said earlier, just fear. I mean, it's a choice that you have to make every single day. And I'm not saying that you're going to always live without fear. It has definitely stopped me from doing the things that I know that God has called me to do. And I'm 46 years old, and I'm still trying to learn, still trying to conquer the fears in my life.
My greatest fear is that I would do something to separate me from God.
Wow.
My fear has stopped me from meeting different people or stepping outside of my shell because I built so many walls from getting hurt. I need to learn to not be so hard-shelled on the outside so that I can let people in and see who I am.
Greatest fear.
This.
Probably drowning.
Drowning. This fear has stopped me from having certain friendships and relationships. So then I finally reached the point where I was just like everyone else, and I was invited to all of the parties. You're always striving for something, and once you get there, it's not as good as it seemed to be at first. And so I didn't want to be like everyone else, and until this year, I was just like everyone else. And I finally started changing, and I completely cut ties with certain people, and I stopped doing things. I'm striving to be different now. So I finally am at the point where I don't care about other people's opinions about me, based on my religion and all that. I stand firm in what I believe in, and I've been called Jesus freak, and I've heard my friends being called Jesus freaks, and like, it's crazy, like the fact that the people that call us this are like thinking it's an insult and like knowing it'll hurt us, but honestly, it's a compliment, like, because they're calling us Jesus freaks because we're so like passionate, and like I'm not afraid to like be a Jesus freak.
You know, one of my fears,
What?
and I think a lot of people that are watching this have this legitimate fear, and they're like sitting there and they're on their phone and all of a sudden, and it lands down, and you're
This is
afraid to
true.
pick it up. You're like this.
You just
or
like
you're
look at it and you're like,
you're like
"Someone look at it."
praying. You're like, oh God, please heal my phone right now, and then you turn over and you're like, oh, thank you, Jesus. I will never let it drop again. And then all of a sudden, and you drop it again, and you're like, oh, and it's cracked. It's not really, but that's one of my fears.
That is a good fear.
That's a serious fear.
What is your biggest fear?
I don't know. Hold on, restart.